Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for July 20th, 2021. Let me begin by calling your attention to a series of conferences that the Schiller Institute will be sponsoring online over the next 4 weeks to address the most significant strategic and economic crises of our time. The first one will be July 24th, this coming Saturday, under the headline, "There is no climate emergency." And we'll be bringing together scientists and others who refuse to accept the line that there is no debate about man-made climate change, who in fact have been exposing the fraud that's been used to push a Green New Deal, which will not only bankrupt the financial system and destroy the physical economy, but is designed specifically to kill off whole sections of the world population. That's what the Green New Deal is ultimately about. Forget all this nonsense about carbon dioxide. It's a made-up story. The intent is to reduce the number of so-called useless eaters using a dumbing down of the population and a destruction of the higher levels of energy flux density which are necessary for human civilization to survive. So that will be this coming Saturday. You can register online at theschillerinstitute.com for that. Then on July 31st, there'll be a conference on Afghanistan at the Crossroads. The point here is that pulling out of Afghanistan represents an opportunity to reverse the last 50 years of endless wars, of Americans going abroad to commit crimes, the killing of American men and women in combat, the destruction of nations. For what? For regime change, to put in power governments that will accept the rules-based order of the globalist financial system. What we have now is an opportunity with the pullout of Afghanistan to actually shift away from these fake war on terror, given that much of the so-called terrorist infrastructure has been funded by the CIA and US and allied governments, and instead introduce development projects and bring in the neighbors, in the case of Afghanistan, India, China, Iran, Russia, and hopefully the United States, to build a nation. And not as nation building as the Bush and Tony Blair crowd call for it, but actually equip them with the means by which they can build their nation. So that will be July 31st. We'll have experts and strategic thinkers who are involved in this, who will be presenting the case for transforming these ongoing regime change wars into a development perspective for humanity. And then on August 14th, the day before the 50th anniversary of Nixon's decision to remove the U.S. from the Bretton Woods system, to sever the relationship of the dollar to gold and so on, setting up the floating exchange system, which is moving into a bankrupt phase today globally, we'll be looking at what LaRouche said prior to August 15th, 1971, with his forecast, and secondly, what he said would happen unless measures were taken to prevent what Nixon was doing under the advice of economists such as George Shultz, Paul Volcker, and Henry Kissinger, who's not an economist, but a British geopolitician. LaRouche warned that we would be heading into an era of systemic instability, bankruptcy, bubble economies, and that the ultimate effect of this would be to destroy the capacity of the human race to sustain itself, to increase its potential relative population density, which is essential for human civilization to thrive. So we'll be reviewing his warnings and then looking at what should be done, including the LaRouche Four Laws of Glass-Steagall, a national credit system, funding of infrastructure, and emphasis on the frontier technologies that are necessary to increase the overall productivity. So mark on your calendar July 24th, July 31st, and August 14th, 3 Saturdays where the Schiller Institute will have online conferences And you can go to the schillerinstitute.com to register for that. Now let me take up in the remaining minutes the latest hypocrisy coming from the Biden administration when it comes to spying. It was announced yesterday that the White House is going to target China, supposedly over its governmental support for ransomware operations. Now, wasn't it last week they said it's Russia that's doing this, and that Biden was putting pressure on Putin to shut down ransomware operations run by Russian criminal gangs, supposedly defended by the Russian government? Now they're saying it's the Chinese gangs that are doing that. And they're calling for the allies to join them in a crackdown on cyber warfare. Now, meanwhile, what just emerged in The Guardian and the Washington Post? An expose of an Israeli spyware firm, which is called the NSO Group Technology, which has a software called Pegasus, which will hack into personal cell phones and embed spyware into the phones on behalf of the clients who hire them. In other words, a private sector company which is doing exactly what the government is doing through the NSA, GCHQ, and so on. And according to reports, they've done this in at least 50,000 cases. Now, this came to the attention of Edward Snowden, who was the person who famously exposed the NSA spying operations, National Security Agency. And Snowden said that the international spyware trade is a business that should not exist. And he said this is something that must be shut down. And he said it's not just that the private sector side of it should be shut down, but the government also. The government has no right to conduct this kind of spying in a random way that collects data and metadata on every single cell phone call, every text message, every email, every visit you make to a site on the internet. Now, here's where you see the irony. The Biden administration has just stated that it would like to monitor private texts on SMS carriers to counter misinformation. You want to counter misinformation? Shut down the CIA, shut down the NSA, shut down the relationship that we've sustained with the British GCHQ and MI6. Those are the sources of misinformation that were behind Russiagate and the continuing efforts to pull the United States into a series of endless wars. What Snowden is saying, of course, makes sense, that this should not be the business of government or private corporations. But this is ubiquitous. And to attack Russia and China with no evidence, when there's massive evidence that the US is doing this and that the British are doing this, is the height of hypocrisy. And of course, this is something that we've known ever since Snowden did his initial report. Now, related to this is the fact that the Assange case has fallen apart. The chief witness in the extradition hearings to bring Assange from the British prison to the United States has recanted his testimony. He said he lied. He lied on behalf of the US government. It turns out that this person, who was the chief witness, gave this testimony based on the fact that he's a convicted sexual predator who essentially was blackmailed into saying that Assange hired him to do the hacking. He admits it didn't happen now. So why is there still an extradition case against Assange? Well, for the same reason that they're pushing for these extra legal measures to be taken against Russia and China, and then that the United States government would now start monitoring text messages. In fact, they're even saying they would put up a warning on your text message that this is disinformation. So this is the kind of policy which came in with the post-9/11 Patriot Act. This is what the war on terror has been all about. It's not a war on terror. The U.S. was funding and training the terrorists in Afghanistan and then later in Syria. And who knows where else, probably Libya. So it's not a war on terror, it's a war against the American people and the populations in the Western European allies. So it's essential that this kind of behavior be stopped. So join us for our conferences. We'll be talking about how to build a movement based on the knowledge of, on the one hand, the criminal activity of the enemies of the United States and how to stop them. And then secondly, what is the American system? What was it that LaRouche understood about the founding of our country and the work of the founding fathers to build a nation that is now being distorted and destroyed by those who would make the United States the global imperial unilateral force? So thanks for joining me today. I'll be back again tomorrow. Feel free to sign up for our website, the LaRouche Organization, and subscribe to it, and get your friends to subscribe to it also. Thanks, and see you later.